Good evening, everybody. I would like to welcome all of you here tonight, express my gratitude for this overwhelming turnout that we haven't expected, to be honest. I don't know how you see it, but we're overwhelmed and glad. A warm welcome, first of all, also to Hula and to Alonli. I'll give some more background info on you in the course of my introduction. My name is Gil Shochat. I'm the director of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung Israel office in Tel Aviv. And first of all, for all German speakers here, there is the opportunity for simultaneous translation. I suppose you received your headsets in the course of your entry. Some introductory words maybe before we start the discussion. I'm sure we are all aware of how emotional, painful, sometimes unbearable it is to talk about Palestine and Israel, about the shattering developments on the ground, not only, but maybe especially since what happened on 7th of October, the brutal massacre by Hamas, the abduction of hostages in the south of Israel, and what happened in the days to follow. And of course, as well, the indiscriminate and unprecedented attacks by the Israeli army in the Gaza Strip, which are lasting as we speak in these minutes, killing hundreds of innocent Palestinians on the ground day by day, causing unfathomable suffering and pain for thousands of Palestinians and their families every day. It is difficult to talk about these developments in Israel, Palestine, but also all over the world, here in Germany. Debates have further polarized since the beginning of the war between Israel and Hamas on 7th of October, more than even before, and maybe also especially within the global left, the German left. It goes without saying that each and every one of us is affected differently by this war and its consequences. The death and the suffering and our individual approaches to the situation are, of course, perfectly legitimate and also welcome in this discussion. We also see that, of course, many people, due to what is happening on the ground in Palestine and Israel, are currently unable to participate in these sorts of discussions due to their individual situation and connection to this topic. Our thoughts are also with these who cannot participate tonight. Here at Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, we try to be a space for open, controversial, but at all times respectful debate and discussion. And as we are here together to discuss ways out of this seemingly hopeless situation in Palestine, Israel, abiding by the basics of mutual listening, respect, empathy, and solidarity is indispensable if we wish to make everyone feel safe in this environment we have today, even if this does not necessarily mean that we will always feel comfortable. And perhaps this turnout tonight is an indicator that after weeks of speechlessness, of polarization, we are now together seeking to regain the capability to talk with each other again about what is going on in Israel and Palestine, and hopefully tonight may be a start in this direction for leftists and progressives of all backgrounds. And in this context, it's also important to say we will have a discussion of approximately, I'd say, 1 hour and 20 minutes, a bit less maybe, and then we will have at least 30 minutes for questions and comments from the crowd, from the people who attended this event, from you, after our discussion on stage. But let us first focus on our two guests tonight. So speaking of our guests, first of all, Rula Daoud. Rula, you are the national co-director of Standing Together, Omdim Biyachad. You're a practicing speech therapist, as I learned. You were born and raised in the Galilee village of Kufr Yassif and began your activism in your home city, and later became involved in promoting Palestinian-Jewish partnership in mixed Jewish-Palestinian cities all over Israel. Before joining Standing Together, you worked as a community organizer, organizing events and protests that drew hundreds of activists in the field. Welcome, Rula. To my right-hand side is Alon Ligrin, also national co-director and co-founder of Standing Together, if I'm not mistaken. You have a background in union organizing. Among others, you have founded Israel's first national waiters union. You were a prominent leader of Israel's social protest movement in the summer of 2011. I think maybe many of you remember the tents on Rothschild Boulevard, where it's sometimes a bit embarrassing to say the office of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung in Israel is also located. And he subsequently served as a political advisor in the Knesset, Israel's parliament, under the former parliamentarian for the Socialist Party list Hadash, Dov Chenin. Alon Li, welcome. So the two of you represent Standing Together, Omdim B'Yachad, a grassroots movement mobilizing Jews and Palestinians from all over Israel in pursuit of peace, equality, social and climate justice. The organization was founded in 2016, and on a side note, as far as the legend goes, please correct me if I'm wrong, the first meetings of this emerging organization, of your organization, actually took place also in the offices of Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Israel, which makes this evening maybe some sort of special from our point of view as a foundation. We're really glad to have you here and looking forward to the discussion. We will broadly divide the discussion into three topics. So first of all, we'll talk about Standing Together, your organization as a bottom-up, binational, socialist and egalitarian grassroots movement in Israel. We will talk about the specific situation on the ground, about your strategies, about the ambivalences of your work, the difficulties, but also the opportunities. On a second note, we'll talk about the German left, the global left, and Palestine-Israel, more specifically, the role of the Israeli left in this equation in times of polarization and enmity. I think it's important also for many here to listen to your views on this charged topic, but nevertheless important topic. And last but not least, of course, we would like to discuss the political demands and perspectives that you bring in. What can the German government, the EU, progressives of all backgrounds in Germany and Europe effectively contribute to your and other progressive struggles for equality and dignity for all in Israel and Palestine? Very interested to hear your takes on this. So let's start with the first subtopic. Ula, first of all, maybe a bit of personal background on how you got to Omdim B'Yachad, to Standing Together. You're a Palestinian citizen of Israel, you're a political activist, but how do you join exactly this movement and why? Maybe some background on this.
Okay, yeah, it's working, right? So first of all, thank you for having us. And thank you for coming. It's really overwhelming to see so many people in one room, and especially at these times. And maybe a bit of how I became a real activist or political activist. In Israel, 20% of the population is Palestinian. And my generation was brought up, I am a kid to parents who both of them grew up under the martial laws in Israel. And being brought up in such families and homes, you learn from your fathers and mothers and both parents to not be political, because you are a minority that has been persecuted. And once you are a minority, you're supposed to lay low, do nothing, kind of be satisfied with everything that the government gives you and say thank you all the time. So most of my generation grew up to be non-political. We did not engage politics in our daily lives, and even if we did, it would be basically when we went to vote for the Knesset, and that would end there. But our lives and each and every choice we make or take are very political, and every little incident we have is political. I started my political life really not that early. At the age of 28, that was the first point I decided to be really political. And it was because, as many minorities all over the world, we live through little events and more major events of discrimination. Daily life is basically many events, especially when you meet back in Israel, when the Palestinian community meets the Jewish Israeli community, we start to understand the differences between us. We start to understand that I was brought up in a different place than Alonli was really brought up in. I was brought up in a small village up the north, and he was brought up in Tel Aviv. And my village has only Palestinian citizens. He lived in kind of a mixed city. So our realities are very different. We don't have the same educational system. And the first time mainly Palestinians really meet Jews inside of Israel is when we go to the university at the age of 18. And we have many clashes because you start to understand that there is a very various and diverse community outside of your own community that you've never really had a proper conversation with. And then you want to get to meet the other side. And then you start to have these very rough political discussions without really understanding much of the backgrounds of each and every one of us. But during these years also, what I have endured was much more racism. Living in Jaffa, Tel Aviv, was hard and is still hard for many Palestinians. One of the incidents we always have is when I want to rent an apartment. My name is Rula. It's a very Arab name. So when they ask me on the phone, "What's your name?" and I say Rula, and they start asking, "Okay, where you come from? What is that name?" And then they understand that I am an Arab. And then I have to explain that I come from a good family and my brother is a doctor and and many things that minorities usually have once you have racism. And not just that. When I went to the university, my professor, I am a speech pathologist. I used to be, at least, until I met Standing Together. My professor she lived in a settlement. And she didn't really like me identifying as a Palestinian, Israeli. And she made sure that I had a very hard life during the years, 4 years, 5 years of my first degree. And many other evidence that take you to a point where you sometimes say, okay, what do we do from here? What do I do from here? And for me, also living in Israel is not an easy life, not just in a political mean, in an economic way. Most people understand that when you leave your home, you become a student, so you have to work, you have to pay for going to school, going to college. You have to pay for the apartment, for the food you eat, for everything, and Tel Aviv is really expensive, so we have to work. And I started working at the age of 16. And when I finished my first degree, I decided that I want to travel. And I was 27 years old. And so I looked at the map and I decided I wanted to go to Italy. And that was the first time I traveled since the age of 15. So I had many years not going to the airport. And now every Palestinian knows that at the airport you have two lines. One for Jewish Israeli citizens, and there's other one for all the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And that's okay, you come prepared, you know how to answer and what to say. But at that same day, I was not prepared to being taken to a different room for security reasons, asked to strip off my clothes, to have another woman basically touch me to check if I have, a bomb somewhere. And that moment of humiliation made me understand that I am living in a society that sees me as a real second-class citizen and doesn't see me as equal. But I decided at that moment that, okay, I'm going to travel. I want to go to Italy. I want to see Italy. I've been so many years, I haven't gone anywhere. And then I kind of slided it. And when I came back, I started my career. I started being a pathologist, a speech therapist. And I was working in a clinic in Ashdod. And Ashdod, it's in the south of Israel, and it's on the borders, close to the borders with Gaza. And that was 2014, one of the hardest, one of the most horrifying wars until the 7th of October between Israel and Gaza. And in that morning, I went to the cafeteria, I went to the bakery, and I wanted to take something to eat. It was 7:30 in the morning. And the newspaper had, the first page had the names and the pictures of all of the Palestinian kids from Gaza that were killed in the bombings at the same week. There were too many kids in one page. And a woman who was standing next to me, she looked at the newspaper and she was full with anger and so much pain also in her eyes. And she said, looking at the pictures, she said, I hope they all die. I hope they all burn. Just let them all burn. And usually for Palestinians in these kind of circumstances, we don't really speak because we understand, like, I am the only Palestinian in the bakery in Ashdod. If I am going to say anything, it's not really going to end well to me, especially at times of war. But I couldn't really shut up. I couldn't keep silent. And I was so angry for her not seeing, they're like kids, babies. And I said, so you want them to burn? Is that what you really want? And how about while they burn in Gaza, me and you go up to the roof and hear them screaming while being burned alive? And at that moment, I had so much anger inside of me that I didn't really care what happened. But at the same moment, the whole bakery was silent. People were, I think, in kind of a shock because they understood at that moment what a horrifying thing she really said. And before leaving the bakery, I said, people who think like you are the real problem for all of us. Looking at kids and not feeling sorry for them is the real problem. And at that moment, in that incident, I understood that I needed a different path, and I started looking for a political home that understands my identity, my place, my pain, me wanting to have a different future and society, and not just for me as a Palestinian citizen in Israel, but also for friends that I have around me, but mostly also for people who live in the West Bank and people in Gaza. And 2 years after that, I just met Standing Together, and that is a whole different story that will take an hour.
Thank you, Rula, for sharing these events and the heartbreaking stories you share with us. And what I think is so also impressive about this is that you said, okay, I want to go to a joint movement, to a Jewish-Palestinian movement, to a movement of partnership, which leads me to you, Alonli. As I mentioned, you are one of the founders of the movement, but what were your motivations to do so? I mean, you have a background as a political advisor, as a union organizer, but this does not necessarily mean that you would want to start founding a Jewish-Palestinian grassroots movement. So what were the specific motivations that led you to do so in 2016? After all, Israel and Israeli history is full of successful or less successful attempts at founding Jewish-Palestinian solidarity movements, but maybe it's even more than that. So I want to hear from you. How did you come up with this and what led you to this?
So I guess it's also connected to my personal background and my personal story, which I will try to say it really briefly and come to the moment where we founded the movement. But I come from a very small family in Tel Aviv. It was only my mother, my twin brother, and my grandmother. And my mother was a single parent. And as a single parent, insisting on living in Tel Aviv, the expensive Tel Aviv, the center of Tel Aviv, next to our grandmother that helped raising us. We've been sent to a school that had a lot of rich kids, and we weren't rich. And I think that one of the very probably most early political memory, that I couldn't call it a political memory back then, was that on the 6th grade, our school decided to send us to a 2 days yearly trip to Eilat. It's a southern city on the Red Sea in Israel. And we were very excited. It was the first time we were getting to spend a night alone without our parents, 2 days with the friends. And then the day before the trip, my teacher called out my name in front of the entire class. And she said that if my mom is not going to pay the fees of the trip until tomorrow morning, I'm not going to get on the bus. And I just remember how I stared at her eyes actually realizing that everyone is staring at me. But I had this tunnel view, and I felt ashamed, embarrassed. I felt like I have no control over this reality. I didn't choose it. And I guess I had a lot of moments like this throughout my childhood. Later, discovering I'm gay, you know, and it also comes at the beginning with some shame or some feeling of being other. A lot of fairness in the world around you. And then when I came to my last year in high school, I started working in a coffee place that was part of a big chain of coffee places in Israel back then. And, you know, as a young person, you go to work in a cafe, the law, your rights as a worker are just a recommendation. In Israel, it's even legal not to pay a salary to people that are working in restaurants and cafes if you get enough tips for the customers. And I remember coming to my boss after the second month of working there, telling him, listen, I just got my pay slip. I worked on Shabbat, on Saturday. I need to get extra payment for that, but it's not here. I worked extra hours. I don't get paid for that. What about buses or you know, all the other rights that I deserve to get? And he told me, listen, this is how we do things here, and it's Kikarab and it's Even Gvirol. If you don't like it, you have a lot of different cafes. Just cross the street and go work somewhere else. But I didn't. I unionized the workers instead. Yeah, but getting me fired, actually. After a few weeks of unionizing the workers, it got me fired. But we decided to take our employer to court, and I was brought back to work with a court order, which is not the nicest thing, by the way, to come back to work just a minute after you got fired. But we had each other, and they still didn't want to recognize us as a union, so we led a strike of 6 weeks, and we won. We got to sign a collective agreement, which became the first collective agreement of young people in Israel, of the dining industry. And I think at that point, I felt I do have some control over my reality, over my experience, over the unfairness around me. But I did understand that it's connected to two things. One was that it's about me working with other people. It's about organizing. I didn't know the word organizing back then or what is community organizing, but something there worked. And the second interesting thing was that one of the 5 union members, his name was Nazir Taha. He was from Jaljulia. And he got to lead 300 workers of an entire coffee chain in Israel, 90% of them Jewish, but they trusted him to lead them. And something there clicked. Something about the fact that we can build something, you know, shared around the interests of people was very interesting for me. A few years later, I was working already in the Knesset, and it was a very polarized moment. Netanyahu came back to power in 2009. Rents were very high. He was promising us that there will never be a solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. He was building more settlements. There was a big attack on democratic freedoms around 2010 and 2011. And I was part of the leadership of the social movement. It was this moment in Israel that we had next to other movements around the world. It started with the Arab Spring, moved to the Indignados in Spain, Occupy Wall Street, but the Israeli protest was actually the largest of them all per capita. We had at one evening, one demonstration, the largest of them all, 500,000 people in the street out of 7 and something million back then. Try to put it in German proportion, it means you have one demonstration of like 5-6 million people in one demonstration. It was huge and we were hopeful. Of course, we thought that what government could stand in front of its people, demanding social justice, demanding political and social change, and seeing that the majority of people supporting it, and will say no. Of course we're going to win. But we lost miserably. A lot of people got desperate. They chose to immigrate out of Israel. Berlin became a very hot spot for Israelis. People said, like, protests cannot work. We demonstrated it will not work. And people lost really hope. And I was part of a group of people, of the leadership and some activists in this protest that insisted on learning a few lessons, I would say. One was an organizational lesson. We understood that it's not enough to mobilize. You can mobilize tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people, but the most important question is what happens in the morning next. How do you absorb the energy, the mass energy we have, and translate it into a political process, a political change, something that is sustainable? And we understood that we need to start organizing, building a political vessel that can, pile up the energy and move from one struggle to the other when we get stronger, and not losing people that are becoming, desperate, because change in Israel will not come in an easy way. It will not come like this. The second lesson came from the political slogan of this summer. I'm sure a lot of people here know, but it was a summer that the most recognized chant was Ha'am, Doresh, Tzedek Chevrati. And the story of how it came to be was that a young Palestinian lawyer from Haifa came in the first night it was the 10th day of the protest, the first big rally we had, and he said, in Egypt, they chant El Shab Yurid Adala Ishtimaiya in the Arab Spring. The people demand social justice. And we looked at each other and we shouted, the people demand social justice in Hebrew, and it echoed back to us from the walls and tens of thousands of people, and it became the slogan. And it was so special because it was the first time in Israel's history where the word Ha'am, the people, El Shab, was used in the political meaning, not as the Jewish people or the Palestinian people, but the people of Israel. The people that are sharing the democracy of Israel, and was chanted in Haifa in front of 60,000 people in Arabic. El Shab Yurid Adala Ishtimaiya. And it was very, very special. And I think these two political lessons, the organizational one and the understanding that we can create a politics where the political protagonist is a wider us that is not either Palestinian or Jewish, but an us, a new political story for the Israeli society, those became the two fundaments of standing together.
Thank you, Alonli. I think it's very interesting to see that immediately after these first questions, we're touching upon trajectories that maybe go beyond the nationalist framework that we're so often stuck in when we discuss the situation on the ground in Israel and Palestine. The trajectories of class, of solidarity, of race, mobilization, strategy. So many trajectories that maybe also go beyond what we perceive as being the ultimate causes, the ultimate discussion points. And nevertheless, we are now again in a situation that seems to be worse than ever, where the conflict, more than a conflict, the situation, the destruction, the pain, the death between Israelis and Palestinians is simply bigger than what we were talking about just now, at least at the moment. And I guess, and I know from how I follow you, that your work has also changed since 7th of October, or at least intensified. So maybe first of all, Rula, the question to you, how did the events since 7th of October and the following impact your personal work at Standing Together, but as a Palestinian citizen of Israel, but also your organizational work on the ground? What were the new demands that came across you? What were the new challenges that you were facing, specifically when we see that, and this is what you mentioned previously, that Palestinian citizens of Israel are facing an unprecedented, maybe even wave of repression since the martial law you mentioned after 1948. So people are scared to speak. So how do they speak and why do they come to you?
Well, let me maybe start by saying that the 7th of October, like people living inside of Israel, the Israeli society, each and everyone has its own story, or where was he or she during that day, that morning, and what really happened. And to many of the people that I know, whether they're like Jews or Palestinian citizens of Israel, we all were impacted at a certain point. For me, I woke up to sirens in Jaffa, and I didn't really understand why, because there wasn't supposed to be a war. Like, nothing is really happening to have a war right now, because our reality is like every year and a half there's a war. So we kind of waited. They say every summer there's going to be a war. That is the statistics that we have. And then, like, it wasn't supposed to be. It didn't pass like a year and a half because we had missiles like on May. So we woke up, and each and everyone I took my phone and I started looking to understand what's happening. Why are we having sirens right now? And to many of us, the first thing we saw was the videos from the south, from the attack of Hamas. We understood that in a few hours, people were killed. A few hours after that, we understood that there was hostages taken by Hamas. And I think with each and every day, we started to understand also the magnitude of what really happened in the south. And we, unfortunately, some of us have lost friends to that attack. Some of us know friends who have their families who were hostages. And 2 days, 3 days after seeing all of that horror on social media, our government, the Israeli government, chose to start bombing Gaza. And my social media started filling up with pictures of kids killed in Gaza, of buildings blown up, of whole neighborhoods just wiped out. And the fear and the pain and the anger that I had inside of me was overwhelming. And the fourth day of the war, as if all of that is not enough, the government, my government, the Israeli government, started giving not laws, but instructions. The police and the government were not easy on Palestinians, on Palestinian citizens, or even anyone who spoke a different discourse from what the government was saying. So even if you wrote, "My heart is with Gaza," or "We don't want any other wars," or anything that does not go alongside with what the government was doing, we were persecuted. There was, at the first week of the war, many known and famous people, Palestinian people, whether actresses, soccer players, figures, very known figures in the community were arrested just for saying anything about Gaza. And they were taken to the police station, handcuffed, put in front of an Israeli flag, took a picture of them, and just kind of spread the picture everywhere in a very well understood message to all the Palestinians that if you dare criticize, if you dare relate to the pain of the people in Gaza, we will arrest you too. And with that, taken, what is left from the freedom of speech and taking it from us. So we had all of these events happening, people killed, going to funerals of people we know who were massacred at the 7th of October. And the overwhelming of all of these events made it much more harder to understand, what do we do right now? How do we act? What is the first thing we really do, seeing all of these horrible things and all of these people being killed? And as a grassroots movement that has Palestinians and Jews, we understood, and also I think national leaders who needed to take a stand and act on something and kind of grab everybody with you, because we understood that the road is really, really long, but we didn't know it's going to be 60 days. And the first thing we did was we just grabbed the leaders and the staff, and we had just a meeting, a Zoom call back then, because there was many sirens and you couldn't really leave your home. And at that Zoom call, people just cried. Basically, we didn't really do anything, but just cried. We shared what happened to all of us, the people we know, and the complexity that we held in that same conversation was that we had people in our staff who had relatives in the south, and we also had people in our staff who had relatives in Gaza. So it was very complicated, but with all that complexity, we were able to still be, humane to one another, to feel that pain, to agree on that pain, and to give it a real place. And then we understood that if we were as a grassroots movement, who works, who's political, who's there, who has a network, a very large network of activists, of thousands of activists, the first thing we really needed was to gather together and to speak and to cry and to also shout at each other, maybe the activists we know, the people we know, really could benefit having such a meeting. And a week after it, when we had less sirens, we started having rallies, conventions, and we started calling people to come to these rallies. The first one we had was in Tel Aviv, and we were so afraid because we saw where the discourse was going. Jewish people were really afraid to talk to their Palestinian friends, and Palestinians were terrified of saying anything, terrified of being even jailed. And we had the first rally in Tel Aviv, Jaffa. 300 people came. The second one in Haifa, 800 people came. And then we just keep moving from one city to the other. And the main thing people wanted in these rallies, not politics, they just wanted to talk. They wanted to understand that the pain is mutual. They wanted to see that each and every one of us has his own story, but feels the pain we feel, and to hold also that complexity for all of us on both sides during these really hard times. That was the first thing we did as a grassroots movement. The second thing we did, because we understood that the Palestinian community was persecuted, and not just the Palestinian community, also, left-wing people who spoke a different discourse from the one that the government held about wiping out Gaza, were persecuted. So we called it a hotline or an emergency line where people can just call us, let us know what's happening to them, because many were fired from their works. Many were expelled. Palestinian students were expelled from their colleges. Colleagues who worked together for years in the same place, doctors and nurses, once they had a small talk, just like talking in the corridor while working, and one of them said anything about Gaza, they were taken to the administration. So the tension was growing up, and nobody was really standing for these people. So we had our emergency line, because that was the first thing people really needed, guidance, whether it was political guidance or even legal guidance. And we gave them these answers, and we also gave them groups of people to be part of, to take part in more work, in solidarity work in different places all over the country. So we tried to hold the complexity, retain our humanity, understand where we are at that moment, and give people mainly a safe space to be part of, and to feel that what they are feeling right now is legit, but we are here also to help. And many of the actions we did really helped people. Many stories that came to our emergency line had, the ears and also the help people needed, and hopefully right now in a better place, basically, and not in jail, or they got back to their work. So these were the first two things we really did at the beginning of the first week after the beginning of 7th of October.
And thank you. I mean, first of all, this work is incredibly helpful, and as you said, and this is something I also gathered from discussions I had with my team, which is also Jewish-Palestinian team inside Israel. It's about, first of all, listening to each other. It's about making space for the pain. It's maybe not necessarily political in the sense of strategy, in the sense of demands, but it is a political act. And then if we talk about the political demands, Alonli, you as a Jewish Israeli leftist activist, you face a Jewish majority in Israel which is mostly in favor of the war. I think this is safe to say, at least in its current situation. What does it mean for you as also a Jewish Israeli activist, but also for you as member of, or as national member, or national coordinator or director of Standing Together, to basically send out a message of peace, send out a message of maybe ceasefire, send out a message of an anti-war message in circumstances where so many are still in favor of what is going on, or the military situation?
I think it should start with saying that the people in Israel is better than our government? Point. We have an amazing society in Israel. Sometimes it's hard or challenging from abroad to differentiate between the Israeli people and our leadership. Sometimes we take the bait of the very hard work Netanyahu did for a decade and a half to recognize fully Israel with the Israelis, with the right wing, with the settlements, with Netanyahu. But this is not the case. This is really not the case. Our society showed amazing solidarity with each other. In places the state just did not exist. The government collapsed. People were there for each other. People decided to engage, decided to take part in initiatives that, you know, it shouldn't be taken for granted. And right now we are witnessing something very scary in our society. And it is some political forces that are recognizing this moment as an opportunity. As an opportunity to capitalize on the real emotions of fear, of trauma, of rage, of even revenge. We recognize those feelings. We feel them, a lot of them ourselves. And they're trying to push our society into darker places, into more scary places, into places that we believe there's no coming back from. Some of those extreme right-wing forces are in the government. They hold real power. Some of them are parliament members. They can sit on the 8 o'clock news in Israel saying that there are no innocent children in Gaza, that the children of today are the terrorists of tomorrow, that the children we didn't kill in the war of 2014 are the ones that committed the massacre of 2023. And it's a real saying. It's a quote. And it's been endured by the host, maybe, of this TV channel, which is very popular. I'm not talking about the right wings, TV channel, channel 14. And no one will say, whoa, 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 you cannot say things like this, you know, on 8 o'clock. Some ministers will say that we need to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. Some others will say it's not a discussion even. There are no innocent people in Gaza. The entire Gaza Strip, 2.2 million people are not innocent. Some other people will have a project of handing guns, 24,000 guns, to armed civilian militias around Israel to try and scare more the Palestinian citizens of Israel. Some other right-wing groups will say that it's the time to rebuild the settlements in Gaza. And of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu and his entire friends in the Likud, they're promising us very high promises that will never be fulfilled. They're saying we're going to eliminate Hamas. I don't think it's going to happen. They're saying that this time the war will work. It's the last one. We're going to achieve the security we deserve. I don't think this war is going to bring that. But the problem is that they're taking the public after them. They're raising the bar of what's on stake at the moment, and they're completely incapable of showing empathy. I'm talking even about the 7th of October, the 8th, the 9th, the 10th. They weren't able to address the public. They did address the public immediately. But they used terminology of revenge, of flattening Gaza, of bringing it back to the Stone Age, of war, of destruction, of killing. But they couldn't say, we suffered a trauma. We lost a lot of people. We suffered something unbearable. We're in pain. We lost. We did lose. They weren't able to give this comfort to the people in Israel. And we are witnessing 60 days of dragging the Israeli public after these very terrible trends. And I think eventually politics is about competition. Politics should be competitive. Because when there's no competition in politics, when there's weight only on one side of the political spectrum, the entire spectrum is tilting to this right. and people do not have an alternative. And unfortunately, if you will ask right now, an average person in the street, what does the left wing in parliament stand for at the moment? What do they say? I don't think anyone will be able to answer that. I don't think people will recognize a competitive idea to the one of the right wing. There will be just, one spectrum of different shades of the same idea. And what we're trying to do is to bring this competitive idea, to start with an idea, with a demand, with a political approach that is different, that is breaking out of the status quo that we're seeing for so many years that just did not work. And by the way, which are at the moment we're still in the same status quo because we're working in the same paradigm of strengthening Hamas and weakening the Palestinian Authority. This is an open policy of Netanyahu, and he's been doing that for so many years. And what we're saying is that only, and it's very important to say it in the clearest way possible, only by ending the occupation and achieving Israeli-Palestinian peace, we will be able to achieve safety and security to the Israeli people. That's it. And it's very important to say and to understand it. Yes, there are real threats. There are real threats to the Israeli people. Yes, we should and need and have to be able to defend ourselves. But the real only way to see a future to our people, to our safety in this country, is when everyone will be able to be free and equal and independent on the country. Unfortunately, we do not choose it, but unfortunately, people are fighting for their freedom, are fighting for what they believe is a freedom. We will never agree, and it's not justified, and we will always condemn hurting innocent people. Hamas is not only the enemy of the Israeli people, and they are not only committed a massacre against the Israeli people, they are also the enemy of the Palestinian people, and it needs to be understood. They are also the enemy of the Palestinian people. They understood and they knew what will be the retaliation of Israel. They knew they can hide beneath civilians, right? I guess it's safe to assume. But we can only take responsibility on our society. And we are Palestinian and Jewish citizens of our society, of the Israeli state. And taking responsibility over our society means that we need to push as strongest as possible to the other direction, to break out of this status quo and to demand Jewish-Palestinian partnership within Israel, an equal society, but also to demand the only solution that can somehow break out of this moment and move us further away from this terrible reality we are all suffering from. And I think talking about Israeli-Palestinian peace sometimes might sound naive, might sound like not connected to the blood and death we're witnessing daily, but it's important to create this alternative.
The alternative to what we're seeing now, it seems as if the two-state solution, and I guess this is what you referred to, has witnessed some kind of reinvigoration since 7th of October. This might be something also worth thinking about, something that has been off the table for so long, seems to find its way back into international discourse. And nevertheless, of course, when we look at the situation between Israelis and Palestinians, we see the asymmetry inside Israel. We see the power structures between Israelis and Palestinians, the occupied people, the occupier. So I'm wondering, what would, in your view, maybe I'll ask you, Rula, when we really think about striving for peace, for a settlement that would benefit all peoples between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, whatever it may be, how would this process look like politically, but also when we think about maybe dismantling power structures that are just so strong, despite the pain that is caused for every individual when they are attacked as innocent civilians. But what would it have to look like inside Israeli society, but also between Israelis and Palestinians?
So I will start by maybe saying a fact, because facts are really important in the place we live, that in Israel, Palestine, back where we come from, there are two peoples. You have the Jewish people and you have the Palestinian people. And the fact is, nobody is going anywhere. And I'm saying that because there is that also a kind of a discord that says only one people can stay, or only one people have the right to stay. And here I say there is a fact. In Israel, Palestine, in all of that land, you have two people, the Jewish people and the Palestinian people, and both of us deserve independence, both of us deserve safety, both of us deserve equality, and our rights to have, normal lives. And by acknowledging that fact, from that point on, we need to understand, to understand what kind of solution do we really want, that solution will guarantee a real independence for the Palestinian people, but also safety for the Jewish people. Because what's been happening in Israel-Palestine is wars, a war after a war and after a war. And we're at a point where we must understand that two peoples will live and continue living there. And they are there, nobody is leaving. And we need to find a system on how these two people really work together in an equal way and live together in an equal way. Now, I'm not gonna draw a line on how do I think the borders should look, because I really don't think that is the main issue right now, or the main question. If we go right now to the streets in Israel and we ask people, so what do you think? For one state, two state. I don't know if people will give you one answer. I don't know if even that is the real, urgent question to ask. But if you ask people, so what do you think? You want this war to continue, or do you want it to end? I think people will have their many more conversations with you, because there is right now a real threat also in people living in Israel and people living in Gaza, the Palestinians living in Gaza who are being killed each and every day, and even right now bombed. I think the main thing people really want right now is their safety. To live in a safe place with no wars, with no bombs. And I think from that point, if we want to take that point and start working from there, the first thing we really need to do is to understand how do we stop this war, and how do we stop these wars from coming back each and every year to Israel-Palestine. And for doing that, we do really need an idea. The discourse is in the Israeli society speaks about only one thing: wiping out Gaza. And by wiping out Gaza, that means maybe conquering Gaza also, sending more soldiers to Gaza, and then more soldiers will basically die, and more people in Gaza will die. And I don't think that is a solution anybody really wants. And maybe people should really understand in the Israeli society, the wars, one of the wars with Lebanon, where so many soldiers came back they died there, did something really horrifying to the Israeli society, where they understood that they don't really want their kids, an 18-year-old that goes to the army is not, I see them, most of them are like kids. We don't want to send 18 years old with guns to control the lives of other people. That is not the future we really want for us, for none of us. So when we talk about ideas, when we talk about politics, we need to bring a different idea that brings a different discourse, because the only one we have right now is a right-wing fascist one that believes in Jewish supremacy. And that idea should be and has to be about solutions. And the first solution should be on how do we stop the wars right now. And the only way to really stop the war, because Israel is not really going to be wiping out or eradicating Hamas right now, because Hamas is an idea. It's not just one person or two person, it's an idea. And it's really getting stronger with each and every time, Israel bombs Gaza. And the solution has to be diplomacy. And when you talk about diplomacy, we talk about the dialogue that we need to have. We need courageous leaders who will sit down, bring a different discourse that speaks about the safety and in the independence of both of these people. And maybe 2 years from now, they will really start talking about Israeli-Palestinian peace, maybe. But we need that start that understands that the safety of us and the independence of people are intertwined. They go together. You can't have one of them without having the other one. And only when we bring these ideas and we have leaders and we have that weight that we have a left discourse in the Israeli society, only then we can really start talking about solution and having solution. And maybe in, I don't know what time, we can really have another talk about one state or two state. I think the most urgent thing to do right now is to stop this war, to bring back the hostages inside of Gaza, and to really sit down and have a dialogue and have courageous leaders being able to say a different discourse, because they should understand that this war is gonna, if we're gonna keep going to wars, nothing is gonna change. A decade and a half of wars between Gaza and Israel always brought the same outcome, and we need a different outcome.
So speaking of diplomacy, speaking of dialogue, you've been touring the United States 3 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken. You met with representatives of Congress, the Senate. You've been here now for 4 days. What are your impressions from your discussions with elected representatives, with political leaders, with those who have an influence on Israeli policies?
Wow, our favorite topic. That and the response of the international left, which I'm sure is coming.
You got ready for this, so we'll do that.
So Israel gets a lot of support at the moment, internationally, from almost every government in the Western world. And it's obvious that those governments are standing in solidarity with Israel. We met with some representatives of the Bundestag here, of the government, of the foreign ministry. And I think it's good to support the Israeli people. It's a desired thing, it's heartwarming, and it's amazing. I think the main question should be, what does it mean to be a good friend? What does it mean to be a good friend of Israel? Does it mean necessarily being a good friend of the Israeli government? Does it mean not recognizing there's a conflict between the people in Israel and the government of Israel? Does it mean not remembering that just until the 6th of October, there was 10 straight months of one of the largest protests against the government, getting the support of the majority of the Israeli public against the government and for the protest? Does it mean, maybe I will say it even in a blunt way, does it mean that when you see your friend being drunk, you serve them the next beer or wine, sorry, beer in Germany, and saying, here, take it? Or does it mean actually, you tell them, let me take you to bed, let me help you get home? And I think it must be recognized that being a good friend to Israel means necessarily being a good friend to the people in Israel. And the people in Israel is not represented by the government of Israel in a very terrible way. The interest of Israel is not to see a full country being abducted by a crazy person, sticking to his chair no matter what, doing political tricks just to survive politically. The interest of the Israeli people is not to go from one war to the other, getting unconditional support from other governments in the world, no matter what. And we hear the music. We hear this support, and we tell those political figures in the world, those governments, those parliament members, that what we feel in Israel is that we get a blank check. We get a blank check. The money from the US will come no matter what. Build more settlements, have more settlers' violence, have more military control over the Palestinians in the West Bank. The check will come eventually. The German government, I will say it. So we had a few conversations, and it was very funny because there was this slogan keep coming back of this Staatsräson, or how do you say it? The reason of state.
Staatsräson.
Staatsräson. And it was funny because they said in the beginning of the conversation, so we support the right of Israel to exist. Amazing, good. Let's move on. And then we said, but listen, the war, we need to understand, it's not going to give us security. It's not serving, like, whenever Israel, right now the Israeli army bombs a full neighborhood, killing hundreds of people in one bombing, Hamas gets stronger. Whenever we kill a family of 30 people, Hamas feeds of this. They get stronger. They're getting stronger at the moment in the West Bank. We support the right of Israel to exist. And then we try to move on and to have different parts of the conversation, and it keeps coming back as a wall that is impenetrable. And it's something that we need to understand. Being a good friend of Israel needs to come with criticism of the Israeli government, of criticism of the occupation, and it needs to come with understanding that there's another people living on this land, which is the Palestinian people. Sometimes it was even tough to get the word Palestinian coming from those politicians here in Germany. And like it or not, there are two people living there, as Rula said, and they're not going anywhere. And if you want to really help the Israeli people, help us opening up the spaces in our society of fighting against the occupation and fighting for Israeli-Palestinian peace, because that's what really will achieve us security, and it might help us sound less naive, you know, if not only these 10,000 people in Israel talking about Israeli-Palestinian peace and against the occupation in a time of war, that sounds weird to, you know, when the bombs are dropping, people are dying, people are data, and we say Israeli-Palestinian peace. But if other societies in the world, other governments will, you know, demand, will put some pressure, it will open up spaces for us, and it will be very, very helpful at a very dark time. And of course, I have a lot of things to say about the left, but we'll keep it for later.
I want to ask a question back, first of all, before we move on to you. I remember, I think, our first meeting in the course of this year in Tel Aviv in one of the cafes in the neighborhood where we both work. We talked about the protest movement you just mentioned. As you mentioned, the protest movement in Israel in 2023 has seen hundreds of thousands take to the streets, protest the corrupt government of Israel, protest against the so-called judicial reform, which is more of a judicial coup. And still, from a leftist perspective, we did also see criticism from the anti-occupation perspective, or from the perspective achieving or seeking Israeli-Palestinian peace. There was always the criticism of, you're not addressing the elephant in the room. And I remember in our discussion, you were somewhat critical of the so-called bloc against the occupation. I think this is something many of the leftists here who deal with Israel or are interested in Israel took notice of. There was a presence of an anti-occupation bloc, anti-occupation protesters. And we talked about it, and I was a bit surprised at the beginning because you were criticizing the fact that they are not, let's say, offering some sort of, they were not making an offer to the wider Israeli public. They were among themselves, they were shouting slogans of anti-apartheid, as they put it, but they did not offer wider swaths of the public who's maybe not leftist, and I think it's safe to say most of the Israeli people don't consider themselves leftist. Being leftist is somewhat of a curse, or it's a curse that it's swirled against many people. So maybe you can formulate again how you see this connection between the protest movement against the government, the anti-occupation protests in this protest movement, and your role as an organization in this.
It's very detailed and in like very high resolution. But I will say it like this. To start, it's important to go out to the streets protesting against the judicial overhaul, to protest against the most extreme right-wing government we ever had, that believes in Jewish supremacy, that believes in dismantling the Supreme Court, that believes in legislating more racist laws in Israel and deepening the occupation. It's important. And we've seen a very good and important wave of protest against the judicial overhaul. What I would say to the majority of people there is that it's not enough to cherry pick one most popular topic of what the government is doing and forget that in the same body, with other hands, they're doing, deepening the occupation or legislating terrible laws against the Palestinian minority in Israel. It is not enough to just, say more people will come if we only talk about the Supreme Court and, put under the rug the other issues. So yes, we must address the occupation. But then two things I think are important to say. One is that when we talk about the occupation in Israel, when we have an arena to operate in, let's say the protest against the government, it's important to ask a very simple question. Who are you trying to convince? Are you even trying to convince? I think in so many ways, politics for young people or for people with strong populist right governments has become more of self-expression than actually an attempt to change reality. So sometimes you feel you really need to condemn reality, and it's more important for you to actually ask of how to change reality. And what we've seen in a interesting way was that a lot of people came with this self-expression tendency of shouting the most radical slogan. And you don't need to convince me. I know my views are radical. Bringing some slogans like from the river to the sea that are foreign to the Israeli society. That's not something that is endured also by our society. Waving Palestinian flags. And then you saw an interesting phenomenon that it existed all of a sudden, this block. It never grew. It stayed at the same size. And most of the people that took the shirts of Standing Together or another organization that was said there's no democracy with occupation, didn't stand with the anti-occupation bloc. They were actually in the wider demonstration holding an Israeli flag that was not in the anti-occupation bloc. So it's a question of how do you communicate with people and how do you ask questions of not only condemning or expressing yourself, but also convincing people and asking how. And another thing that is interesting, maybe it seems less relevant after the 7th of October, but not talking about the occupation was not the only problem of this protest. Another problem was that if you would look at who goes to demonstrate, you would see it's mainly one sociological group in the Israeli society of mainly people coming from the same center of the country, having the same level of income, being Ashkenazi mainly, and also ignoring the social nature and the class nature of how Israel is a bad place to live. So if you would look from the outside, let's say if you live in a peripheral city in Israel, you would see this protest and you would not be able to recognize yourself in it. And it was another problem, and I think Standing Together was also criticizing of this thing.
And this brings me maybe again to you, Rula. There was also, and I wonder how it is now, we're seeing the most terrible violence since 7th of October in the Gaza Strip, of course, after what happened in Israel. We see a frightened Palestinian community inside Israel. How do you mobilize a frightened population? First of all, maybe looking back at the protest movement that came to a halt, but also now, mainly now, how do you mobilize people who are frightened to actually go protest and also convince them that their Jewish neighbors are not their enemies, although the lust for revenge is so deep in many parts of the Israeli society? How do you, the work inside the community, how does it work also for the Palestinian citizens of Israel?
In 2000, I'm going to take you a bit more back. 2019, a very, there was protests that started in one of the villages, the Palestinian villages in the south of Israel, in the north of Israel, called Majd Likroum. And it started with a bunch of young Palestinians, because since 2015, the Palestinian community inside of Israel is suffering from so much violence and gun being, giving to basically criminals, and with that weakening the Palestinian community with so much crime and poverty. And in 2019, what happened is that also the police didn't really help. Like if somebody would die, if somebody would shoot anybody else, the police wouldn't really come. That's like we would eliminate one another and make it easier. And in 2019, two brothers were killed in their, like, when they were entering their home in Majd al-Krum. They were shot by criminals, and their mom stood there, called the police. The station was 20 minutes from their home, because there was like new police stations in too many Palestinian cities all over Israel. She called the police, and it took the police 40 minutes to come. And while waiting, her kids, like her two boys, bleeded until death. They died in front of their home. And only after they died, the police did really come. And what young Palestinians did was, in Majd al-Krum, to call out people to demonstrate in front of the police station, asking the police station to act or to preventing more crimes, to taking the illegal guns from that are distributed inside of the Palestinian community, and to basically, take care of the citizens. We are citizens. And a demonstration started in front of that police station. It started with five people from the same village. The next day there were 100. The next day there were 1,000. And they demonstrated for 2 months, every day, in front of that police station. And what started as a really small demonstration spread out to all of the cities and kept on going from the north to the south. And during 2019, we had one of the most biggest demonstrations held by the Palestinian community inside of Israel, asking from the police to do their work and to prevent the killing of the Palestinian community, and basically, prevent bad things from happening to the community. Then COVID came, and people sat at their homes, but the killing continued. Like, people were shooting one another in the streets, and the police didn't do anything. So from 2019 until 2021, people went out to the streets and protested. And during these protests, what happened is that the Israeli police forces shot and killed 4 Palestinian citizens of Israel. I know their names, but because we went to their funerals also. And still, with killing them and telling us again, where is your place in this community and in this society, people still went on and kept on demonstrating again and again and again and again. And I remember us as a grassroots movement, when we started going to these demonstrations, we went to al-Fahim, which is one of the biggest Palestinian cities in the center. And there was so much tension in al-Fahim because everybody knew that the police is coming there to shoot people. Like, the police was ready to shoot people. And what we did, what people really did, the shared community or the activists that we had, and the understanding of how do we really protest together, how do we really bring a change to these kind of policies that we have inside of Israel, made people understand not just the Palestinian community inside of Israel, but also the Jewish community inside of Israel, that we need also to protest together on this issue. And since 2020 to 2021, people came to al-Fahim to protest, Arabs and Jews from everywhere. And I remember one of the protests when moms, we have this protesters, their moms, they go on with like a yellow vest, and with this like preventing, like they want to prevent any kind of violence by the police. But I was there, and the first thing that happened, we're talking about moms, like 50 plus 60, 70 years old ladies. They were standing there to prevent the police from, being more violent. And the first thing the police did was beat one of the moms without taking care that she has a vest and written on it, mom. And the day after, we had parliament members come with us in order to show solidarity and really stand there together and protest. The police also beat the parliament member, the Knesset member, which is not allowed, basically. But what we understood back then, during 22 weeks of continuously demonstrating on al-Fahim, is when you have people from the ground, going out and protesting, and you understand that this kind of struggle, you have it as a shared struggle with all the community you have around you, these kind of struggles will succeed and can succeed. And after so many weeks of protesting, what happened back then is that we didn't just protest, we asked for different politics. We asked for budget for the Palestinian community, and we had that budget. Like the government sat down, and there were many protests and many pressure on the Israeli government that was back then in 2021, and we really had that budget. And I think that was one of the first times the Palestinian community inside of Israel and the young ones understood the power they have. Like how to really lead a conflict, how to take a struggle and make it more public and more popular, and to bring inside of it other and different communities. One of the main issues in Israel, in the Israeli society, that most minorities are affected by is the police brutality towards minorities. And I think one of the main minorities are the African and Ethiopian minorities, like Jewish inside of Israel. And you were able to see people going out and demonstrating together, which made it possible to have a real joint struggle for different communities that could have a real, maybe we could really succeed. There was really felt that we succeeded at something. And that gave the Palestinian youth the understanding that they have the power, that if we organize ourselves and we mobilize ourselves, we do really have this power. And today, what's happening since the 7th of October, that despite the persecution and people being afraid of writing and maybe posting things, we understand that many of us still have privileges. You can still, some of us can really still say something, speak about something, talk about something. Maybe I am one of the privileged one because you haven't been arrested yet, but maybe after coming back from Berlin we will be. But you still have figures and people inside of your community that can hold on that struggle and be able to have that freedom, to speak about what's really happening. And most of the Palestinian youngest, because they have seen other voices still speaking, are becoming more active also inside of standing together. So since the 7th of October, we have seen more activists and more Palestinian activists taking part on things that we have been doing, which can be solidarity groups in different places that can be working on the emergency line, or even giving advice to others and having meetings at the campuses before the start of the school year of colleges. So even in these harsh times, when you give people the ability and the place and the safe space to be part of something bigger, to really resist what's happening, they take it because they want it. Because people understand that the power of doing and changing isn't not just in the individual, but it is in the collective power that you have and the people you have all around you. So since the 7th of October, maybe little people really write, but many more people really do things by helping and helping other posting stuff and helping people who are being right now persecuted in a legal issue. So I think that despite all of that, we can see how my community is still working on bringing a different message and not really just, not just being just scared of the persecution, but taking action.
I think because we promised to talk about it, before we go to the questions from the crowd, we will have half an hour. When I listen to you two speak about the complexities of Israeli reality, speak about the potentials of collective organizing, speak about the power of solidarity, but also the power of class-based politics, the power of universalist, humane struggles. When I reflect this, what we heard now in the last an hour and 20 minutes with the international debate going on the situation in Israel and Palestine, which is, to be fair, not much of a debate on what's going on inside Israel. It's a debate about what's going on in Gaza, of course, and rightly so. But still, there seems to be some sort of detachment between debates in the international left, the German left, the polarization we're witnessing, and what we're listening to today. And this is why, maybe also with an outlook to what you need as Israeli leftists, Palestinian and Jewish leftists, how do you assess these debates? But what should be changed if we want to actually succeed in changing the reality? I would like to ask you, Rula, first, how you see this.
To change the reality
of the debate, but also what do you need from the international left, from the German left? How do you explain this detachment? And
I think we've all seen what's happened. We've all seen what's been happening everywhere by the social media, and what we've seen is basically people becoming more radical and picking a side at times of war, which is legitimate because we are at times of war. But I think that the less legit thing that all of us back home felt is that what's really happening is more is not really, mirroring our reality, and our reality is very complicated. It's not really simple. It is complicated. People chose one side. Some people would go out and say, "I stand with Israel all the time," and things like and holding on flags. And other people would say, "I stand with Palestinians and only Palestinians." But what we say, coming from Israel, Palestine, and living that reality of war, is that if we are trying so hard at times of war to bring a different story, a different discourse, to talk about us as the people who are right now suffering from this war, which we're not talking just about the Palestinians or just about the Jews, we're talking about the real people from both sides that are suffering from this war. If we are able to bring that complexity, to hold that complexity, and to ask for a different solution that benefits both of us, you should be able to do that too. We do not ask. We want you to go out and demonstrate. We want you to go out and try to change what's happening right now. But we want you to bring our story. And our story is more complicated from just choosing one side. We want you to choose the side of the people who are suffering right now in Israel, Palestine, because of this war. And sometimes seeing what's happening right now in the demonstrations all over the world, I see people really not understanding, and some of them really losing their humanity. I'm seeing posts and people posting stuff that doesn't really, I don't really understand where that comes from, because how can you, by seeing posters and videos of kids being killed, of women being dragged on trucks and taken forcibly, how can you still say that is fake? How can we be in a point that we can't really relate to the basic thing that is called humanity? At times of war, we do not want you to be radical for one side. We want you to be radical for both of us, because both of us deserve safety, security, peace, and independence. So when you go out and you demonstrate and you shout out for the life of both of us, not just for one of us. And you should be able to do that.
So Aloni, do you want to add to this? So I think this was clear enough. You've spoken enough about this, and you can also follow this on social media and how you talk about this, and I think it's important to follow. So now we have the space for questions. I would ask you to signify your readiness and willingness to ask, contribute, a maximum of 2 minutes, because we have half an hour. We want many people to be able to voice their questions. Corinna, my colleague on the right-hand side, and Henning on the left-hand side will check and try to give everyone the opportunity to ask. And I will watch the clock.
Okay, das hat mich jetzt überrascht, dass ich die Erste bin, ja.
Just einen Moment bitte, damit, so that you can understand, maybe put on your earphones, if it's in German. You're welcome to ask in German too.
Ich muss ganz kurz sagen, ich war 2014 im Westjordanland und ich war auch in Israel. Das, was, ich kann Ihren Namen jetzt nicht wiedergeben, Dula, erzählt hat, ist mir da auch sehr bekannt geworden. Als ich am 7. Oktober die Nachrichten gehört habe, auch nach den Vorinformationen und der Entwicklung in Israel, war mein erster Gedanke, hoffentlich findet jetzt so etwas statt wie eine endgültige Lösung dieses palästina-israelischen Konfliktes. Ich bin zu keiner Demonstration gegangen, weil keine Demonstration mir die Möglichkeit gegeben hat, die jetzt hier zum Schluss auch von ihr deutlich gesagt wurde, dass also beide Seiten in den Fokus genommen wurden. Und ich habe eine Frage an die gesamte Community hier. Ich bin aus der Generation von 68. Wir haben intensiv, international gegen den Vietnamkrieg jahrelang gekämpft. Gibt es so etwas nicht in dieser Situation, dass man das aufbauen könnte?
Another 2 questions and then give you the opportunity to answer.
Hello. I am an Israeli Jew who's been living in Berlin for a few years, and I've been living in total in Europe for 10 years. Your organization is relatively new, and I was wondering how much you're interested in cooperating with older left-wing organizations that work for Palestinian and Jewish dialogue, Combatants for Peace, the Families Forum, etc., because my feeling is that the bigger, the better. The louder our voices become, the more effective it can be. And today in this room, we're mostly young people, also of specific, I'm guessing, specific social class. And I'm really wondering how you can reach more parts of society, more than you'd say in Hebrew, לא רק לשכנע את המשוכנעים, not just convince those that are already convinced. That would interest me. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we take another question and then you answer. As you wish. We'll take another one. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is mainly because the discourse here has been so suppressed, like publicly, and also I feel like in our circles and families, I don't know how it is for other Germans, but I don't speak to half of my family right now. And yeah, I just wonder, how do you deal with those kind of situations where people are so focused and stagnant in the way that also the German identity is so tied up with the existence of Israel? And I've just come to a point where I don't know how to move forward with actually having a discourse and having a conversation where it's not just an investigation of me, where I have to prove that I'm not on the wrong side.
Thank you. Loli, you want to start answering? Maybe the first question about the anti-war movement?
So I would say that maybe it's even connected to the last question, but we are witnessing at the moment an eruption of a big pro-Palestinian movement across the globe. We see a lot of people going out to the streets in major cities in the US, in Europe, in the Arab world, supporting the right of Palestinians to exist. I think that's the base, supporting their freedom. But there are other floors on this space. Some of the floors can be more complicated. Some of them can be more complicated to listen to. Some of them can be really more complicated because the message is not only Palestinian freedom, it's also against Israelis or even Jews. And we need to acknowledge that, that there is some anti-Semitism in this movement. It doesn't represent this movement. It doesn't represent at all the demand for Palestinian freedom. And we, as much as we don't need to identify the Israeli public with the settlers, we need also to acknowledge the wideness of this movement. And I think in general, and not only in general, it's an amazing thing to see that people in the world care, and there is a movement demanding to end one of the longest existing and surviving conflicts and occupations in the world. But I do think we need to understand that we live in a world where a lot of what happens abroad, a lot of what happens in one point of the world can influence through social media, through political discussion, through a narrative, other places in the world. And we are very impacted by this movement and the language and the terminology that is being created at the moment in the world. It seems that for some people, it's easier to hold the complete historic justice in their hands and not to talk about solutions and not to talk about how to move further from this moment. And we acknowledge the historic wrongs and things that really happened. But at the moment, a lot of the times, the things that happen in this movement are being waved against us in Israel, saying, look at the left. Look at your friends. Look at what they're saying. What did you expect decolonization will look like? Well, not like killing innocent people, right? Or children. And it's been impactful towards us. And I do think that the bottom line is that it's important to have this movement, but this movement needs to address also the right for safety and existence of the two people living on this land. And I think that as much as we have responsibility for our movement, for our society, people should have responsibility for their movements as well. And then we come to the discussion. Whenever people are raising the bar of all the questions, it becomes a war of words and terminology. And then, honestly, we and the people we come from are forgotten in this war. It's not about us anymore. It's about signaling who you are and where you stand. It's about telling something to your society, to your government, which is a real struggle, but it's not connected necessarily to this struggle. And then you take out your frustration from sometimes a real lack of ability to change reality, and you decide to change your words because it's easier. You have more control there. So occupation is not enough anymore. You say apartheid. Apartheid is not enough anymore. You say genocide. And it becomes higher and higher, and the entrance door is like getting close for other people to even enter this movement. And then it becomes something that it's impossible already to have a nuanced conversation, to have a very good, stand saying, I stand with Palestinians. You should stand with Palestinians. They are oppressed. They live under occupation. They live under siege in Gaza. Palestinians deserve freedom, and we do not argue with that. But Jewish people living in Israel deserve safety as well, and it shouldn't be contradicted. And when we are not able to have this conversation that holds both things on together, we have a problem. We have a problem, and it's a problem of the discourse and the war of terminology, which I just want to say the last thing about. I think in many ways it has been so much theorized that it lost connection also to the real world. It's like, having those terms and terminology. I will read your essay. Okay, write an essay, sit in a library, spread it out in an email. We read your article, very interesting about post-colonization. Okay. But then what do we do next? How do we move further? Does it give an answer? I don't think it does.
I don't know. I think there's some space, specifically regarding to the question asked from the other side.
There was a middle one about cooperation.
Cooperation, and this is maybe also an interesting question. Do you have cooperation partners on the Palestinian side?
Well, I think we get asked that question a lot, and we have, as a grassroots movement, as somebody who wants to change the reality and really build a political will inside of the Israeli society, most of our work is inside of the Israeli society. We have relationships with organizations in the West Bank. Unfortunately, we don't really have any contact with organization in Gaza because you're just not allowed, basically, and because there is not many organizations. And the only people we had contact with was at another war in 2021 in Gaza, where we had activists coming on a Zoom talk from Gaza and talking to people living in Israel and sharing their reality and talking about what's really happening in Gaza. and some of them were jailed after that Zoom talk because of talking, to Israelis. But we believe in cooperation. We believe that in order to really, build a bigger discourse and bring our discourse to different people, we do have more cooperations inside of the Israeli society. And I think part of the question was, how do we reach a bigger, right?
Less academic audience, perhaps. I don't know if this is with the reference, but maybe. So, yeah, I mean, talking about.
Now, most of the work we do as a grassroots movement is we work on issues, on daily issues. Before the 7th of October, we were supposed to go on, we decided as a movement that the main issue we're going to be working on is housing inside of Israel, because renting an apartment became really expensive. Buying a place you can call home became a dream for many of the people living in Israel. And that was the issue we decided to work on, because we understood that issue, housing and having a home, was relative to many communities living inside of Israel. But then the reality came again, Middle East, Israel, Palestine, and we found ourselves again in another war and other demonstrations, and things just changed. But even now, I might say, after the horrific day of what happened, 7th of October, I think we still see an opportunity. There is an opportunity to really change, to bring a different discourse and to really talk about a solution inside of the Israeli society. Again, the only voices being heard right now, and like really loud, is Bibi and right-wing politicians. And they need something else. People need to hear that another discourse, a competition should be held in politics. And I think because people at the 7th of October felt that we're left out, unprotected by their government and their army, they're trying to also ask bigger questions on what do we do right now and what is our government planning on doing, and they're not really getting answers. And we're talking about, most of the Israeli society right now who have these questions. So us giving a different story, a different discourse, is also opening a place for other people to really join and hear the message that we are talking about, which is a very different one from the one we all knew for so many years with the right-wing governments we had. So I think there's also here an opportunity to reach out different communities and also maybe younger communities inside of the Israeli society.
Thank you. I think we have space for another round of questions, so please raise your hands and we'll hope to satisfy as many.
Okay. Hi. This is, I guess, related to some of the previous stuff you were talking about not really having contacts in Gaza and so on, and being focused on the Israeli society, but still, as somebody who's like from outside and is like, I don't know, you guys are still sort of informed about this, I assume. What do you think is the recourse for Palestinians living in Gaza and West Bank? Like, I found myself talking to a Palestinian colleague of mine, and we were both sort of on the same page about, the horror of October 7th and so on, but like, he was, I think I understood from him this kind of like feeling that Hamas, whatever they may be, is like the only thing there that's like resisting sort of, and like he condemned the terror and so on, but like sort of the idea was that we don't have anything else in a way. And so, and talking to him, I found myself saying that I believe that Palestinians have a right to defend themselves, meaning not, Hamas type of actions, but like they're under occupation, like any occupied, like oppressed people have a right to somehow defend themselves. But what can it be? Because obviously Hamas is not it, and it's not interested actually in defending Palestinians, obviously. But like, what are the options for a Palestinian living in Palestine to resist and not be, I don't know, either branded a terrorist or not to fall into like these terrorist groups either? Yeah, hope that makes sense.
you want to answer directly? So we take another question.
Sorry. Yes, hi. I'm German with a Palestinian background, and after October the 7th, I emphasize on being Palestinian more than German, but this is another issue. And the first weeks of the war after October the 7th, it was, as many maybe know from within the audience, for people who want to solidarity with Gazan, it was not allowed, legally not allowed. So what I did is that I went to the Western city and had a Palestinian flag and my kufiya and standing there alone, because this is legal. So standing there alone is legal. So of course the police came, 6, 7 police cars, and they wanted to forbid this demonstration, because they call it as a demonstration. And I'm telling this because the police asked me to stand beside, because there was an Israeli demonstration or about the Israeli hostages across the street. And so I asked the police if I can go there and approach them and talk to them. And they were, of course, very afraid. So I went there, and the first thing I said is that I really pray and hope that the Israeli hostages will be freed as soon as possible, as well as I hope and pray that the Palestinian hostages, in brackets, within Israeli prison will be freed as soon as possible. And we had a really interesting discussion, and then suddenly there came a German lady, and she was trying to cut off the discussion because she saw me as a Hamas terrorist.
I also don't want to cut off. You have 30 seconds left for your question.
Okay. That was one experience. My question would be, when you mentioned that you have an Israeli right-wing government, which, I mean, from my point of view, it's too easy to put it on the Israeli government that engagement or peace or call it whatever is not possible. So can you maybe also talk about what about the educational system? You spoke about 2 different educational systems. And last thing, coming together minorities. You mentioned, Rola, I think, like the Ethiopian Jews. How realistic is this issue? Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. I suggest we take the 2 questions and take it from there. So who wishes to answer?
I would say 2 things that are coming to my mind for 2 things, but it's not real. All the answers can be given. One is that being a Palestinian in Gaza or being a Palestinian in the West Bank, you don't have a lot of freedom to resist or to protest. You know, in the West Bank, it's illegal to even protest against the Israeli army. So you can say, I want to march from our village, let's say the village of Nealin, want to march out of the village and to say, we don't want a foreign army controlling our lives, we don't want the settlements next to us to exist. It's not legal. Like, you don't have a real way to do that without the army coming and stopping you, maybe shooting at you. So the right of even demonstrating is not existing. Of course, that creates a more violent way of resistance, because when something is criminalized, people become criminals, and they have other options to do that. I do not think that violent resistance is going to take Palestinians very, far away, honestly. I don't think it's just in any way to hurt innocent people. And I think that as much as we have a struggle within our society of where should we go, what kind of a society are we where are we going, there's a lot of different questions and different movements and different tendencies in the Palestinian society. And I think that I wish to see a popular movement, a popular struggle against the occupation and for peace on both sides of the border, both sides of the fence. I think it can create a big environment for a different kind of leaderships of our people, for a different kind of way, and I acknowledge how impossible it is to be a Palestinian living under occupation, not even having your right to demonstrate against your reality. It's very tough. And the second thing I want to say is that the way we found it to be effective to talk to people in Arabic or Hebrew or English even, we have a very active English social media at the moment, is to not try and hold all the truth and all the issues at the same post, at the same conversation, to compare, to be in this world where you say, if I talk about the Israeli hostages, I talk also about the Palestinian prisoners. I think it's complicated, and in some ways it cannot be even compared. Yes, there's a very big problem of children being taken out of their homes in the middle of the night in the West Bank by the Israeli army, being put in an Israeli prison, and then not even seeing a lawyer, not even having a trial, and sitting in the Israeli jail. It is not just, and it needs to be stopped. But will I compare it to a 2-year-old baby that was kidnapped of their home by Hamas? I don't know. Is it comparable? Should we even try and compare it? So we try to touch upon all the different issues and to give them the space to talk about them directly without trying to compare and put them all in this. And it creates more space for conversation. And also, we are getting attacked by that a lot in our international media. People call us a lot of names from the left, from the right, from the Palestinian side, from the Jewish side. But I do think it's important for us to try and hold this conversation and to try and touch the issues of the very complicated issues one by one without trying to be standing in a place where we are like holding everything together and not being able to say something significant about anything.
I want to answer like the first question. I think I have something important to say here because you've brought a brilliant point. The answer is unfortunately no. The Palestinians in Gaza right now doesn't have any other form right now being bombed in war, losing their homes, and traveling from the north of Gaza to the south of Gaza. They don't really have at times of war any other alternative. And I think that is why you see most of the videos that you see is people shouting out to the communities abroad, asking them to do something, to try something. They are asking people to really do something. And I think, again, when you go out and demonstrate, like you have a voice that can be heard and a voice that can really affect the politics of your countries, the politics of your politicians. And when you go out and you demonstrate for the people in Gaza, you should ask for the freedom of the people of the Gaza, to stopping the war and the killing and the bloodshed. And you should not ask for that by also asking the demolition of the Jewish people in Israel, because that doesn't just affect the Israeli people, but it also affects the Palestinian inside of Gaza, because then you trying to help Palestinians and calling out means that you want Jewish to be demolished, and then your voice will be taken as, I'm sorry to say that, an anti-Semitic voice, a voice that calls out only for one side. Again, if you have a big voice, a strong voice, you should call out, you should use the right slogans, you should use you should ask for the right things during these times, because unfortunately the people of Gaza right now don't really have any other alternative. And I hope soon this war will end, and then maybe really with other solution and other governments, the people in Gaza will have the ability to bring an alternative. But even that will take them so many years. So when you go out and you shout out, be careful of what you say, because what you say is shouted all over the world, and the people of Gaza really want you, but they want you also to be fair.
I'm looking at the watch. It's already 10:05. I would say we take another 2 last questions, and then we wrap up the discussion. And please, short questions and short answers. Thank you.
So my question is, maybe it's really, I don't have the right information, but you're still talking about war, but I only see the Gaza Strip being bombed. So where's the war? Like, just the word war is for me, and like what I think is war is like bombing each side, but like this is just one side. So I don't get the word war in this situation.
I am Brazilian, and back on the years that precede when Bolsonaro came to power, it was very hard for me living abroad to figure out in the media what to trust, because it was very polarized, it was very two-sided, there was no nuance, and I think we can draw some similarities with what is happening over here. So I'm asking you guys, since you guys are from over there and you stand with the two sides, for us, especially living in Germany where the whole media is one-sided, where can we get information that is not inflammatory but is true and it gives us hope? And that's it.
I would want to answer 3 short points.
I would like to.
So please. Okay. So one is that it's not only one-sided. There was a massacre of Hamas on the 7th of October. 1,200 people lost their lives, innocent people. It's a fact, and it happened. It's not even a discussion of whether it's happened or not. And there are missiles being shot from Gaza to cities in Israel where civilians live. That's one thing. Second thing is recognizing that it's not. There is power dynamics. There is one side. There is a strong side that is also hegemonic on the land, that is also occupying people that are being controlled militarily by the state of Israel, but are not the citizens of Israel, and that's unfair. That's a power dynamic. They don't have an army, but they do have violence that are inflicting as well by choice of some parts of the Palestinian people. I don't think it represents the Palestinian people as a whole at all. And the third thing is that we don't want to entertain this war of words and terminology. It's being considered as a war. It's being called in Israel as a war. It's being called in Gaza, in Palestinians as they talk with us, as a war. So it's a war. It is something that we feel that is in the magnitude of, it's a life-changing event for us. Our lives have never been in such a dark point. All the people living on this land in different ways, and we acknowledge the different ways. We acknowledge how the suffering is different in so many different ways, and also the magnitudes. But it's the darkest time point of our life, and we know that what has been before will never be the same. It's changing forever. And I hope that this war will be a turning point where not only the extremists will see it as an opportunity for darker and more terrible times, we will see it as the war that was the final war where we chose also to go in a very different path of ending the occupation and achieving Israeli-Palestinian peace.
No, you said it a bit, like I don't have anything more to say, but I agree with you and with him, there are power dynamics when you speak about what's happening, and we do understand who's the more powerful, and also by seeing, 60 days of being bombed and having entire families dead is that kind of power dynamics, but it is a war. As I only have said, missiles are being basically to Israel. That is a war. Everybody calls it a war in Israel and also in Gaza. So that kind of terminology is for us is very understood. and we call it a war because it is a war. But we understand that the dynamics of the powers are very different.
And maybe an answer to...
So I think about right-wing populism, I guess,
and where to get information.
is a big question. Right-wing populism rises also in this atmosphere of lack of competition, when the left wing becomes more center, and then the center becomes more right wing, and then everything moves to the right, and the right uses real feelings of people. They're using real fears. In many societies in the world, right-wing populists will come to the people that are not recognizing even their societies anymore, having their factories being closed and to move to China or Mexico, and they're telling them, we see you. We see you, but we ask you to turn against the ones that are beneath you in the social ladder, instead of uniting everyone that are on the bottom against the ones that are really in the top. And it's very effective. Look at the other. They're taking your job. Look at the Jews, the Mexicans, the immigrants, whatever. They're responsible for your situation. We, the ones that are holding the power, and we're not responsible. And it's a very effective political equation. And without creating a different kind of political approach that starts in the very first moment where you leave your house, the questions of how do you get to your job? What is the salary you get in your job? What is the safety you feel as a woman? What is the safety you feel as LGBTQ? What is your ability to raise a family feeling economically secured? Without addressing this and creating a political popular left, we will not be able to really give hope for a different kind of change, because people are going to easy ideas, are going to emotional places, and it's easy to convince. And I think the left needs to reinvent itself as one that is able to be centered around people's life and not about values that are going above our heads, talking about democracy. What does it mean?
Hula, the last word is yours. Yes. After I only answered the questions, I want to give you the last words.
Like to answer the question, or just
maybe answering the question, but also maybe signifying what gives you hope in these days. Maybe this is like a last, but like short.
Look, to be honest, some days I just want to vanish from this place, because I'm so tired and I'm so angry at everybody and everything around me, because of the pain I see, because of the people who are suffering. But in other days, when I always say it, when being a part of a group, of a collective political idea, of a group of people, of activists, who, although the really bad times we are having right now and the death and the killings everywhere, still choose each and every day to wake up, to go out, to do something, to go on to a protest that they can really be part of, to write something down, to be part of a bigger group that brings a different discussion, or even any little act of solidarity, maybe in all of the craziness and the war we are having right now, that is the only sane thing I find that gives me really hope. So maybe being part of a bigger thing, of a thing that is a real collective, gives me hope, because sometimes I wake up and I don't have hope at all. But then I look at the people around me and I understand that I have other people with me who have the same beliefs and do want to make a change. And maybe it's naive to say it, but in standing together we have a slogan. And what we say always is, where there is struggle, there is hope. And we are still struggling.
In this sense, I would like to thank the two of you, Rula, Alonli, for taking the time. Thank you to the crowd for your patience, for your questions, although of course not all questions could be asked. But I also do have hope that this event is maybe a start of reinventing the debate around the situation in Israel and Palestine, and I think this event showed that it is possible to talk respectively and openly about the situation. Thank you so much and have a good evening.